Recreating a camera's real-world movement inside of the computer is another essential technique to creating believable visual effects. Using only footage as our source, we can use a method called camera tracking to reverse engineer the camera's physical movements. The information we get from camera tracking can then be used to integrate elements into our shot. So here's the completed shot that we're going to recreate. I used camera tracking here to introduce a bit of ground decay in this drone shot. So let's switch over to our start comp and begin to recreate this. First of all, let's go ahead and look through our footage, and you'll notice that this drone has a fairly wide angle lens on it. You can see the horizon is curved, and that poses a problem for the camera tracker. It likes as few distortions as possible. So if we were to try to solve this camera using this footage, we're going to get an error. So we need to first get rid of that distortion. And so let's select layer 1. We'll go over here to Effect and go to Distort, Optics Compensation. As we drag this field of view slider, you'll see that we're introducing more distortion. So we need to move the opposite direction. Click this Reverse Lens Distortion and we can do just that. What I'm looking to do is try to straighten out as much as possible this horizon. And so somewhere in like there, maybe 72, that looks pretty good. But you'll notice as I turn off this effect that all this information here on the outskirts of the frame gets blown away or cropped off just by virtue of the composition size. Let's go over here to Composition Settings, and you'll notice that we have a composition of 1280 by 720. So what we need to do is accommodate for all this extra information that we're cropping off. When we select Optics Compensation, we can resize this footage to max 4 times. And it's going to keep all that information. But again, because we have cropped off our composition to something smaller, we need to adjust it. So back in composition settings, with that optics compensation enabled to resize, let's go ahead and click and drag. And depending on your footage, this is going to be an arbitrary number. All I'm looking to do is increase the canvas of our composition to grab in as much information as possible. So let's go ahead and say that this is, I'm going to round it off to 2300, and we'll say OK. Now that we've gotten rid of the distortion and kept as much information of our shot as possible, we can camera track this, but we first need to take all this information and pre-compose it. If we were to try to run the camera solve on this, actually After Effects is going to look at just that and give us an error. So we need to tell After Effects to look at all of this as footage, and we can do that by way of pre-composing. So with layer 1 selected, we'll go down to Layer, Pre-Compose, and take all this information and move it into a new comp that we'll call Undistort. So with that Undistort pre-comp now selected, we'll right-click and track camera. It's important to be at full resolution when you do this so that we have as much information as possible to get to After Effects. It's analyzing in the background. We're free to continue working on other aspects of our shot, and depending on the complexity and length of your shot, this could take longer or shorter. All right, now that that's done, let's go ahead and come down to the Advanced section. And what I'm looking for is the average error. Ideally, you'd like this number to be as close to 0 as possible. And if you look, we can select our camera tracker and turn on this button right here, and it's going to show us the track points it's using to solve the camera. Let's go ahead and increase the track point size and zoom in. And by eye, you can see that After Effects is trying to track all the different points in the shot, all the features that it thinks are suitable. And we're getting some points here that we don't want to include, like the smoke or the dust that the car is kicking up. And that's going to actually throw off our solve. So we can better enhance our solution by excluding all this information here. So let's go ahead and step into our Undistort composition, and we'll zoom out. And all I'm going to do is select layer 1, go over to my pen tool, and just click and drag all this area here and exclude this from consideration. Let's move to our masks and invert that so that we subtract the center. And now we'll just feed this into After Effects. Everything else looks to be pretty good. We'll come back into our start comp, and with that camera tracker selected, let's reanalyze everything. And so without any of that extraneous information throwing off our camera solve, hopefully we can bring down this average error to something less than 1, is usually my rule of thumb. It's never really going to get down to 0, but as close to 0 as possible. Ooh, right exactly at 1. How about that? I feel I should go get a lottery ticket now or something. Let's go back into our undistort composition and just revert that back to none now that we have that camera solved and we can see everything in place. Let's select our 3D camera tracker effect and you'll get these points back again. And the next thing we want to do is define the ground plane. Because we're creating a 3D camera, we need to tell After Effects what's the ground, what's the orientation, and all that. So what we can do is zoom this back out, and with our 3D camera effect selected, let's go ahead and click and drag around these points. And you'll see that we have a target, and it's oriented in the same fashion as our ground, and that's good. Let's go ahead and right-click here, and this is going to tell After Effects this is the ground plane orientation, and this is the center of the world. That bullseye right there, as far as After Effects is concerned, is the origin, 0, 0, 0. Okay, now that we've done that, we can come through and with our selection tool, we'll go ahead and pick a point and just right-click and say, Create Null and Camera. We have 2 new layers here, and if we select that first layer, you can see it pop up in the composition window, and it's moving along with our footage thanks to this 3D camera that we created. If we switch over to this 4 view, we can split our screen up into active camera and the top, the front, the right view. This is actually should be, I'm going to reset that so that we see the top, the right, and the front. Okay, so let's go ahead and select our 3D camera, and if we middle mouse click, we can see that we have keyframes for that camera. Let's go ahead and look at it from the side here. And that camera with the keyframes is a digital representation of the move this camera made in the real world. Let's go back to our 1 view here. And with that null as a reference, we can continue on with this process and attach our elements to this and have it move along with the shot. All thanks to camera tracking.